Hello, everybody. My name is Kaylee Fisher, and this is Dr. Scott Sterling. Today, we're going to be talking about our research project and our poster titled Creativity and Language Play in ESL Textbooks.
Yeah, and so really quickly, a little bit about the background of this project. One thing that students often note in our introductory courses, when we have them do textbook evaluations, is just kind of how dry and unfun a lot of the textbooks they evaluate really are. They always talk about their own language experiences, about just how boring they kind of found textbooks to be. And so that got Kaylee and I kind of thinking about this as a process of just really how interesting are they? How engaging are our textbooks? And so we did what any good researchers would do, right? We spent copious amounts of time looking into the data, which was a lot of fun. And we actually came up with 3 different research questions for this project. And I'll just read them verbatim here for everybody in case you can't see. The first is, what is the overall rate of language play, creativity, and communicative language teaching in ESL textbooks? Number 2, does the type of task impact the amount of creativity, language play, and or CLT used? And then finally, does the use of creativity, language play, or CLT in tasks correlate with the level of the textbook itself? And so I'll let Kaylee kind of go over the methodology with you guys.
Yeah, so to investigate these questions, we looked at 28 different ESL textbooks from 8 different series across 3 major publishers. And we chose the books based on how complete each series was and, of course, our access to the textbooks. And so each of the tasks within each book was individually hand-coded by me. So that's about 10,000 activities altogether. They were individually coded for whether or not they contained language play, creativity, or CLT. So after I had coded 19 of the books completely, Scott looked at the data and recoded a subset of that. And then we discussed any discrepancies. And in the end, we had 100% iterator reliability. And then after those discussions, I recoded, excuse me, I recoded the full set of all 28 books again, and that resulted in our final data set. So in terms of operationalizing our variables, tasks that contained language play would prompt the learner to either play with the form or the meaning of the language, or to use humor, or the task itself was humorous. Creativity would prompt the learner to look for answers beyond the obvious ones contained either locally in the book or elsewhere, and to come up with their own answers. And a communicative task would require the learner to interact in the language to gather information, and then use that information for something beyond just classroom academic purposes. So that gave us a lot of data that I'll let Scott break down for you.
Yeah, so let's just kind of look back at each of our research questions and come with some conclusions from them. So again, this is a very exploratory research project for us, because we weren't really sure how much creativity, language play, or CLT would be included in any of these textbooks. I think initially we didn't think the answer would be very much, and we were kind of surprised actually by how little there actually was in the end. And so you can kind of see here the breakdown of the inclusion of each task. And so out of, again, about 9,793, or let's just say about 10,000 tasks, you can see that only about 18 of them contained anything that was language play related, right? So there's very limited amount of humor, very limited amount of playfulness in the data sets. Somewhat surprisingly for both of us was also the limited amount of CLT in each textbook. Now, some of that is probably to do with the way that we coded CLT. We really wanted to make sure that an activity that was communicative would ask students to do more than just simply answer a question for question's sake. So a lot of times a question would ask students to, say what your 3 favorite movies are, and then that would just be kind of it, right? So yes, they would be talking to a person, just listing their 3 favorite movies, but there would be no connection to anything else in the rest of the activity. And so for us, that wasn't really communicative. That's just speaking practice, right? And so not everybody might agree with that the way we operationalize that variable, and that's fine. But again, I think if you look at this in terms of purposeful language usage, there's very minimal amount of that inside of these textbooks. Also, some of that has to potentially do with the fact that most of our textbooks were reading and writing focused, not speaking or listening, or an integrated skill set. And so that might have also been a contributing factor for the limited amount of CLT practice within each. However, we would also, I think, make the assumption, or one might make the assumption, that a textbook focused on reading and writing would have a lot of creativity included, right? That students would be asked a lot to write ideas out and to create new things. And again, it was kind of in the middle ground, right? About 30% of all of the activities that we looked at were creative in nature. which again means that about 70% of the time there was very minimal amounts of creativity. So yes, they might be writing a full sentence out, but the sentence itself was coming from a reading that they might have done 2 or 3 pages before, or it might have been to, instead of looking at a picture and then writing what the picture makes them feel, or again, anything of all creativity involved. So again, we thought there would be limited amounts of each of these variables. We did not really expect it for it to be that minimal, especially for language play. We thought it'd be a little bit more, but it really just wasn't. Now, the figure number two, or sorry, figure number one on research question number two is looking at the amount of either language play, creativity, or CLT per task type that we coded. So not only do we include code for the inclusion of those variables, but also what kind of task was going on here. And just so you know, figure one only lists the data, and as this will be for figure three as well. It only includes the data for creativity. The other two just did not have enough of any kinds of tokens to be useful, right? Everything was below 1%. There just wasn't that much there. So we can really only talk about any meaningful way creativity for the next two research questions. And as you can see here, across the board, the 30% of activities that included creativity, again, there's a decent swath of them, right? So some discussion questions had a lot of creativity where students are asked to come up with their own ideas, or they'd be asked to draw something that they had just read. But again, drawing and discussion questions themselves were limited. I think if I remember right, maybe Kaylee can include this, there might have only been like 4 drawing activities across the entire 28 books. So it's very, very limited, even though 100% of the time they did that, they were highly creative. So again, this figure isn't really all so useful in a lot of ways. But again, you can kind of see the breakdown there. But finally, the one that we're actually really interested in for this research, this is why we wanted to use books in series instead of just random books that we had, is that we actually wanted to see if, again, creativity, language play, and CLT actually increased in usage per book level. And so a lot of times people will make the argument that low-level students can't use humor because they don't know it yet. We have to wait till they're higher levels. And again, that's a debatable question to start with. But do textbooks even follow that model? And so here on figure number 2, you can see what we're charting out is the percentage of tasks per book per level. And so we have an intro level book and then levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that for 3 of the book series, the green, which is SS, the blue, which is EW, it actually decreases, and the yellow, the LAW, no, SS, that's what I'm going for, the green one. That one, those 3 are pretty much flats, right? They don't really show any real strong developments in terms of amount of creativity. So again, this only can show the level of creativity. Only 2 of our textbooks are even kind of trending towards having increased amounts of creativity per level. FW, again, went up from 20 to about 50%, which is great. The other one that went up was the TW, from again about 9% up to about 18-ish%. So again, 3 out of 5 book series do seem like they are increasing the amount of creativity over time. But again, 3 of the 5 didn't. So it's questionable whether or not books actually get more complicated in the amount of creativity that they get to use. And again, unfortunately, we could not do this sort of analysis for either the language play or the CLT because the lines were 100% flat. Kayla's going to kind of summarize all that again for us and then talk about some future implications for this research project.
Yeah, so like Scott said, we don't really think our research or our results that we found are earth-shattering or surprising to us in the field of linguistics. We wouldn't expect textbooks to use a lot of really authentic language, and so that's where the teacher in the classroom comes into play. However, if the goal of the instructor is to include as much of this authentic language as possible, textbooks are probably not the ideal way to accomplish this goal. Unfortunately, especially in a time like right now, where most schools and many teachers are 100% remote, teaching through Zoom and other platforms, textbooks are probably being relied on more right now. So in that case, supplemental materials are needed where you are highly utilizing a textbook. So supplemental materials would include things that would provide the language play or the creativity or the CLT. And also our ESL textbooks very often ask students to use English without purpose beyond just answering the question from the textbook. And so teachers should try to find ways to integrate activities that require the students to use English beyond just answering the question from the textbook or answering the question from the quiz. And so finding ways that we can do that that implement these elements of authentic language would be the biggest recommendation if that's your goal. So future research could investigate exactly which materials might be best to supplement for language, play, CLT, and creativity, as well as which ways can we maximize the creativity that we are getting our students to use from the textbook. So how can we ask students to think more creatively during our creative tasks?
Yeah, that's the end of our little video. Thank you guys for listening, and hopefully we'll see you at our presentation.
Thank
Thanks.
you.